Hello and welcome to the Dr. Ayaz Safi Podcast. I'm delighted to be joined by Abed Ahmed. Abed is a Deputy Coordinator for Special Education Needs and Teacher for Mathematics at West Walsall Academy. Abed, who stammers, has overcame many challenges throughout his life and career. However, he was awarded the Teacher of the Year for 2019. His work was further recognized and awarded the National Association for Special Educational Needs and Disabilities Award in 2021. Furthermore, he has recently set up a knowledge hub in one of the most deprived areas, supporting the local community. Abed, thank you for
My pleasure, sir.
Abed, let me take you back a little bit to your early days or childhood when you discovered that you stammer. What went on your mind and how did you come to terms with it?
So the first time that I remembered my stammer was when I was around 4 years old, and I realized very soon that I spoke a lot more differently than other children and so on. In fact, one of the first few memories that I always remember is my dad telling me off for stammering because he thought that I was always in a rush to speak. He told me to breathe, slow down, and so on. So those were my first ever few memories. So they were quite negative, very negative sort of feelings. And even in school, in primary school, like the first few memories that I remember were the kids laughing and so on. But I just tried to ignore it as much as possible.
Okay. And was there any support available for students who stammers in your school at the time, primary, secondary?
At the time, there was absolutely zero support. So I mentioned this so many times that throughout my whole my primary school, my secondary school, no one ever stopped me to say, "Oh, we can tell that you stammer. Would you like some support with it?" So there was zero support. It was only when I started to seek support when I was at university.
Okay, so during the school days, because there was no support available, how did you cope with that then? And what did you think? I wish there was some support as well.
So, firstly, I always thought that I was like the only person in the world that stammered because I never met another child who stammered. I never ever did research on it because it was just something I always felt quite embarrassed about and really ashamed about. So it made me feel really isolated. So I just felt like it's something that I need to deal by myself, never talk about it, and so on. And the longer the years went on, it made me feel a lot more like feeling quite alone with it, and so on. So I'd say that was the main thing that I felt in those years.
And now you mentioned there was some support available at university. So you went to college, went to university, two different universities from what I remember. Were there any support available in college or universities, and how accessible that was?
Yeah. So the only reason why I started to seek support, like in university, because I generally wanted to give myself the best chance to get the highest grade possible, and I didn't want my stammer to prevent me from getting a low score in my presentations.
Yeah.
So I seek support from, I think it's called the Disabilities support system and so on. And when I spoke to them, actually remember the first thing they asked was, "Can you provide me proof that you stammer?" I'm like, what do you want me to provide? I'm actually standing in front of you. I can understand on days because some people might come and just pretend they stammer, but it was quite very obvious that I do have a stammer. And since then, they were very reasonable with it.
Oh, that's good. But on that point, because stammer it's not a disease.
Yeah.
It's not maybe recognized as a disability as of yet. So how could, for example, the universities or even schools or now as well, people can go about it and prove that they're actually stammers? Is there like any sort of kind of diagnosing system that they can get with, or there isn't anything?
So, so there's no diagnosis. When you go to your GP, and you talk about, let's say, that you want some support with your, stammering, they will just refer you to speech and language therapy. It's not something they will officially diagnose you with, because it's not like an illness, like you mentioned. Like it's not a disease. It's not officially classified as a disability, but it is recognized as a speech and language communication need. So the only like evidence you can probably provide is like a report from your speech and language therapist and so on. And I think a lot of people once they speak to you and see you, then they more or less are convinced that you do have a stammer. But just like many things, it's a wide spectrum. For some people who stammer, you really can't tell. For some people who do stammer, you can tell. So it's a very wide spectrum.
It is actually, and on that basis, like, because you've been stammering since childhood. You mentioned you discovered it at the age of 4, for example, and so on. And you talked about your father's trying to tell you, give you a bit of a support there as well. How supportive were your overall family, your friends, and then also teachers?
Yeah. So firstly, I think it's my fault that I never spoke about it. My family actually never spoke about it. So I felt like, besides that, when I was younger, my dad used to tell me off for stammering. Then we've just never spoken a single word about it. So no one mentioned it. So I didn't mention it. So it felt like a very taboo subject in my family. And I think that I played a part in it because I refused to maybe talk about it. So maybe my family members just felt really awkward about it, and they thought maybe that I don't want to speak about it. It was only until the age of, I think, 23 when I spoke to my parents about it. So, like almost 20 years after that, I realized that I finally spoke to my parents about it. And the reason why I spoke to them about it was because they started to see like a lot of the work that I was doing.
Yeah.
They saw me on like some news channel, and they were like asking me, "Oh, what's this about?" And then of course I couldn't I'm not to tell them. So I think if I spoke to my family from a young age, I'm sure they would have been very supportive, because my family is. So I think they were supportive in the sense that they never spoke about it. Maybe a matter of respect for me.
Okay, and is that something you wish that you should have spoke about it at a young age, you as well as your family, then of course taken from them and spoke to other people and saying, okay, this is what's happening, and if something or someone at your family is also, for example, affected by this, then you need to speak more about it. It's similar to like anxiety or depression. Not many people, especially from the research, that men folks don't really talk about it as much, but we are affected by it. So I think, do you think that people should talk more about it?
Yeah.
Given that there's some maybe a bit more support available now?
So 100% strongly recommend people to speak about it as soon as possible. Because the first time that I did speak about it was to my speech language therapist, and I just felt so much better straight away. I felt like, like my shoulders felt lighter and so on. And I just felt like more that I spoke about it with people, the better that I felt about myself. And when I told my family, like it felt like the best thing ever, actually. And I stopped worrying or worrying about what people were thinking about me. Yes, it probably didn't improve my my speech or my fluency.
So thank you for that, Abid. And Abid, what supportive strategies did you apply throughout that helped you either in your confidence, for example, in your academia life, in your professional life, and also day-to-day challenges that you faced? So what strategies did you apply that could be supportive to people who actually stammers as well?
Sure. So I'd say the number one advice is to spoke about like things that you need to do before you start applying strategies is trying to get over the fact that you know your stammer can still get you wherever you want to be. So like it shouldn't stop you from doing all the things that you want to do. So I think the number one step is to accept your stammer, to accept that it's part of you, to accept that it's always going to be there. Just that you have to learn to manage it. I think as soon as you get over that hurdle, you've won like 50% of the battle. Then after that, if you want to do or apply practical strategies, there will loads that I've learned from my speech therapy. Like she advised me on breathing in a certain way, so taking my time like a bit more than usual. Of course, it doesn't like look natural to like people that don't stammer, but it can improve your fluency. So like other things like if there's certain words that you really struggle to say, yes, you can change the words around to try and say a word that you can use. And a few other things were like, it's just not trying to think about your stammer at all. Because as soon as you start to think about it, sometimes it can make things worse for you.
Because you are the prime example, because you stammered from, or still is affected, or stammering since childhood. You went on becoming one of the most successful teacher in the country that we have, really. You won 2 awards, one in 2019 and another one in 2021, and kind of your work is well received from what I have seen. So I think the advice that you provided to the people is, because I know someone, for example, or some people who has stammer, and they don't speak up. They don't have that confidence to go and seek the support as well, for example. So it's good that you are kind of inviting people to seek the support and also speak up about it, and carry on, chasing your dream, because it's not a disability really. It's some sort of maybe a speech impairment, for example, and to access some support there, it can really help. So that's great. Thank you. Abed, you set up a club or a hub for students at your school who also stammers. Can you tell us a little bit more about that and how it's been received, and what kind of support does it provide?
So like in every school that I've worked in, one of the first few things that I did was set up a stammer support group, because around 1% of the population at least will stammer, but some various research says that it's probably a bit more, like 1 to 3. So in every school, I'm convinced that 1% stammer. So for example, in my first school, there were 1,000 students, so 1% of that will be 10. When I spoke to the Senko, he said that I've only got about 2 students. But then when I raised some awareness in the school, that 2 actually grew to 9.
Wow.
Because more teachers were being aware and observant. And in my next school, there were almost 2,000 students in that school. And again, 1% should be 20. The Senko in that school told me that they just know 4 students. Then I did again the same thing. I raised awareness in the school with staff, and the group grew from 4 to 17 in the space of a few weeks. And likewise in my third school, I did the same thing. So like in these sessions, I actually rarely spoke about stammering. So what I was just doing is doing confidence building activities. So like we play board games. We practice doing a presentation on things you really enjoy. And my main focus was to try and not get them to think about the stammer, but more about thinking about the confidence, feeling better about themselves. And because everyone in that room stammered, they felt a bit more safer. And once I realized that their confidence was improving, I realized that they stopped caring or thinking about their stammer because they then start to realize that, you know what, this stammer is not something that will stop them from doing what they need to do.
Excellent. But that's a great support, and that support, that the one that you provided in the last 3 schools, and I think by outlining there, it seems like it's been well received and supported. Do you think is similar support available across the region? And if not, what should be done?
So of course I'm not sure what goes on in every school, but I'm probably convinced that the support is not in many schools. And the reason why I think that is, firstly, not many schools staff, know about stammering. Like there's so many things out there, but they probably don't know much about stammering, which is interesting because the same stat is for people with autism. It's the same stat, but yet we know so much about that. Whereas for stammering, it's the same stat, but we don't know it, lack enough about it. So I think that plays a key part. Secondly, money is thin across so many cities, councils, schools, and for them to get, speech and language therapists in is really difficult. And the waiting time to see a speech and language therapist is like a minimum of a year. Wow. So that shows it's quite thin across schools, which means that there's probably like a lack of support in schools.
I see. And based on your experience, what advice would you give to the parents, for example, or families who have a child with a speech disorder, stammering, for example? How would they go about it, and what supporting strategies they should kind of provide to that child?
So a few pieces of advice that I would give to, firstly, families is not to worry too much. I'm very convinced that their child will find ways to manage it as they get older and so on. But of course, if you can tell from a very early stage that it's starting to affect their mental health and so on, then of course react straight away. And the way that they can react straight away is, of course, always speaking to your GP first. You can then self-refer to speech therapy. So my number one piece of advice is there's no harm in seeking speech and language therapy. In terms of what they can do at home is things like never finishing their sentences. So let them just say what they need to say. If they're really young, remind them to breathe. Okay. Of course, but once they're a bit more older, like when they're teenagers, it's probably not the best piece of advice because I'm sure that they do know that they need to breathe regularly. Other things like be as supportive as possible and be as encouraging as possible. So like reminding them that it's okay to stammer, to encourage them to do things that they really feel scared about. Like, for example, if they're going out with their family and they want to order some food, just encourage them to go and order the food and so on. So, small things like that can really make that, big difference for them. And the fun thing I would say is for the parents, not to try and advise them too much because, like, I know that it comes from a good place. That sometimes the advice that they give might not be the best piece of advice for them. And, that young person is probably frustrated already. So, when you hear someone tell you to slow down, that's not really useful.
Yeah, okay. Well, thank you for that. And based on your experience, for example, what are some of the common misconceptions or myths surrounding the identification of speech disorder, including stammer, for example, or other disabilities, and especially within the ethnic minority communities? What do you think are some of these misconceptions?
So there's quite a lot. The first misconception that people think about stammering is that you're nervous. It's not, but being nervous can make your stammer worse.
Okay.
That's the number one thing. So it's got nothing to do with being nervous. A lot of people think it's because you don't know what you're talking about. Again, which is not true. It's just the way that we speak. A few other things that people will think is that you are anxious. And again, it's not. So like other things that people think is that you know, like it's something that you learn. Like a lot of people actually think that stammering is a learned behavior that you maybe were copying somebody else, and so on. In terms of how it's perceived in like South Asian cultures and so on, I do think disability in general is a taboo subject in South Asian communities for some reason. Like they don't tend to seem to talk about it and so on. And it's something I feel as if a lot of parents feel quite ashamed about. And I see in my role as a deputy Senko, like we have children who are on the spectrum, who have ADHD, mental health issues, and sometimes when we speak to parents about it, it's not something they want to always accept. I think that's something that they find it really hard to accept. I don't know why. I think families feel a bit.
And so, do you think, going back to that cultural aspect of students with a mental health issues or stammer or any other disorder, how can we tackle that within the ethnic minority communities? Because you are the deputy of the special education needs for the students. Does it start from the school, or can, for example, can schools collaborate with the local communities and come up with the tailored interventions to raise awareness amongst the parents, and then apply that to the children? Like, what strategies do you think could be done to tackle that taboo kind of approach within the ethnic minority communities?
So, firstly, amongst schools in the UK, social, emotional, and mental health needs are the most increasing in schools. We're seeing it as a society, and we're seeing it in children a lot in schools, which is a scary thing. Of course, the difficult thing is that, of course, the main job for schools is to teach students, but then you have to also support students with so many other needs. So I feel as if schools are also finding it really difficult to fix problems for society, but schools do the best. So we do have lots of interventions in school for children with mental health issues, and these like interventions are mainly based around getting them to talk about it. We educate them about why they feel the way that they feel, because a lot of these young people can't explain their their feelings and why they feel that way. So like other ways that schools can support is by running parent workshops where you get the parents into school. We educate the parents about what mental health is and what they can do as a family to support their child with it. That's like another thing that they can do. Another thing that schools do is they actually talk to children in school about it. So like in school assemblies, we so like so we have awareness weeks like mental health awareness week, and we spend a lot of time talking about the issues, what they can do to help themselves. So yeah, so like in a nutshell, schools do run interventions to support children with mental health, or they do run workshop for parents, and they do a lot of raising awareness with the children in school, because if we raise awareness with them first, by the time they become adults, they'll be quite knowledgeable around it to then start supporting a lot more other people.
Yeah, no, thank you for that. I mean, what is your message to people who suffers from stammers or any other disorder, especially young people, or even including adults at the universities that I see some, for example, who suffers? Or generally, like, what's your message to them?
Number one message is, of course, to speak to someone about it. So if you're at a uni, school, or college, speak to your lecturers, your teachers straight away. because they will be like able to signpost you to somebody who can definitely support you. You know, don't deal with this by yourself, because you know the second you start to deal with this by yourself, you're just gonna keep spiraling into a dark place where you don't want to be. So seeking speech and language therapy. Yes, it might take a long time to get your first appointment, but that's the first step to take. And they are, of course, specialists. They're professionals, or they deal with people with speech and language communication needs on a day-to-day basis. They will know the right things to say. They will know the right strategies for you. And I promise people out there, as soon as they get that first sort of support, they will start to see an improvement in their life and the way that they feel about themselves. And my final piece of advice is, once they've seek that kind of support, is then start to support like other people who have similar difficulties as them. Because I'm sure there was something I was reading the other day for people with depression, was that if you make other people happy, you start to feel a lot more happier by yourself and better by yourself. So there is definitely something there. So people who stammer, if they start to support younger people who stammer, they'll feel a lot more better about themselves, because I'm sure those young people will then be looking up to them, and then they'll feel as if they have responsibility, and you just start to feel confident about yourself in general.
Thank you. Abed, quite a personal question, and if you don't mind.
Sure.
When you, like we mentioned earlier, not everybody knows that you stammer, and it's hard to understand as well. Like, if you're speaking to someone over the phone, like a company or mobile network, for example, or someone, and they don't know that you stammer, how do they find it? Or like communicating with you over the phone? And has there been ever an incident that you remember that from the other side of it, people are maybe blaming the network or saying, "Oh, we can't hear you," or "Can you call me back?" Or so, anything of that sort has ever happened? And how did you deal with it as well?
So the first thing is, so many times, when I'm on the phone and you're talking to the machine and so on, and they tell you, please spell out your name, or please tell us your date of birth, and so on. The amount of times that I kept having to repeating myself because they couldn't understand the way that I was spelling out my name, and so on. So that's the number one thing. Even like if you go to a drive-through and you have to speak to more than the amount of times that they've not been able to hear me or understand what I was saying. In terms of directly speaking to people over the phone, whenever I've taken long to say something, they actually check if I'm still on the line. Like, "Oh, is anyone there?" I was like, sorry, yes, I am. And they're like, "Oh, okay." But there have been times, well, it's quite regular. When I do speak on the phone, a lot of them do think it's like a signal issue, and they're like, "Sorry, I didn't just catch that," because of the way that it sounds. So what I do find that it's useful if you just tell them right at the beginning, and they're quite supportive in that way. There was once that the phone was put down on me because my words wasn't coming out for like a good 10 seconds. I was blocking on my words, and they just put the phone down. I think they just assumed that no one was on the other side. So I partially don't blame them, because I didn't tell them from the start, and maybe some of them just don't have that awareness, or they've not received any training around it.
But I guess, for example, if you're speaking to a person on the other end, they may understand, even if they're not aware of it. But if you're speaking to a machine and you're spelling your name or date of birth, as you mentioned, and some people can't pronounce their first name or their last name, who stammers, it's really challenging. And I think that should be taken into consideration, given that the improvement of AI now, for example, and the technology enhancement. So that definitely, I think, is something that should be taken into account, especially that more and more people are becoming kind of affected by speech disorder, for example.
Yeah.
Abed, let me ask you this. You recently set up a knowledge hub providing education, supporting the local community, for example. What is it, and can you tell us a little bit more about this, the hub that you have set up?
Yeah. So, so I live in one of the most deprived wards in Northwest Birmingham, and myself and my friend, we set up Lozal's Knowledge Hub for the community, because we're quite local to Lozal's. In fact, we live in Lozal's. We've worked in Lozal's, so everything about this place is about Lozal's. Like 90% of the tutors that we've got are all born and bred in Lozal's. So we're trying to get the kids to feel like inspired by the people that are running it. And we run tuition lessons. We also look out for free services with no funding at all. So during school holidays, we actually run a lot of free lessons. And in fact, we lose money because we pay the tutors to come in. Of course, if we did have funding, and of course I'd be saying that we have funding, but we don't. And we do offer like other things, like for example, if children wanted to come in and revise and they needed a quiet space, they can use our centre for free.
Okay.
And because we know that a lot of the houses in Lozal's and the families is quite overcrowded, big families, and probably don't have that place to revise. Other free services that we do provide to my friend and I, we're both Senkos,
Okay.
as well as teachers, and for the Asian community, trying to get the right support for your child with a special need or disability in school is quite hard for them. Firstly, is because they don't know how the system works. Secondly, there's a language barrier. So we've said to families, we'll give you free advice on how to speak to your school to get the right support for your child. We'll help you with writing applications to make sure that your child gets that free support. And of course, so I speak Bangla, my friend speaks Pakistani, so and a majority of Lozals are Bangladeshi and Pakistani. So we speak in our language, get them to understand us better. Another few things that we do that we're trying to set up for the summer is trying to get some projects in. And again, with no funding at all, it's just something that we really want to do.
Abed, thank you, and especially the insight that you've provided about the Stammer and also the knowledge hub that you have set up in Lozils. Again, thank you for all of that insight, and I wish you all the best for everything that you do. Thank you.
It's my pleasure.
Thanks, Abed.